All right, we're looking at the reliability of the Old Testament as part of a daily lesson that you give yourself by studying Scripture. The reliability of the Old Testament by studying it, verifying for yourself, and then sharing what you've learned to others, how reliable indeed it is. You're proving out your salvation in the sense you're approaching Scripture from the point of view of you get the information about your salvation from Scripture, but is it reliable? Well, I'm glad you asked that. I get that all the time. All the Bible is written by men. Well, let's look at the content. Could God have not been behind these things? Do you believe in God? Well, yes. Okay. Then could not God have been behind at least some religious book or some message to people about who He is that is accurate? And God being who He is, could He not work within that man, or these men, 40-some-odd authors, to make it a viable, trustworthy work, the Bible itself, properly translated? Well, let's take a look. Bible2.htm. We're down there at the Old Testament. So we'll scroll all the way down the Old Testament. Looked at archaeology and Roman historians and passages in the New Testament. Now let's look at the Old Testament. This brings up the question of the faithfulness of the Bible. Let's type that in. This brings up the question. Okay. Here's what we looked at before. The various collections of manuscript evidence. In the Old Testament. Textual transmission and manuscript evidence. Thousands and thousands of manuscript parts and whole books, and most of the Old Testament. Unbelievable number. Even though the Old Testament does not boast of the same quantity of manuscripts as the New, the number of manuscripts available today is quite remarkable. Far greater than any other ancient book. The Bible, even the Old Testament, is supported, corroborated by this. So, we have the question of the faithfulness of the transmission of the Bible text. And there are numerous types of manuscript error, which the textual critic may discover in the early manuscripts of the Old Testament. So we have some questions. Are these of so serious a nature as to corrupt the message itself, or to make it impossible to convey the true meaning? We looked at the New Testament, and the answer is no. 50,000 variants New Testament, and we have so many manuscripts there, we can resolve them all. And all of them do not affect any major doctrine. Well, if they are, in the Old Testament, then God's purpose has been frustrated. We have the New Testament is really reliable. What about the Old? It went back so many more years. God could not convey His revelation so that those of later generations could understand it correctly. If He did not exercise a restraining influence over the scribes who wrote out the standard and authoritative copies of the Scriptures, then they corrupted and falsified the message. How strong is God? How reliable is He? And He allows yet men to participate. And if you don't seek more details and do your own personal study, you won't trust it. So much information from people that I get that testify to their understanding of the Bible, it's not trustworthy at all. And I give them information, and all I see is the back of their heels, because they realize, well, here's somebody who's done his homework. You be the same. If the message was falsified, the whole purpose of bestowing a written revelation has come to nothing. For such a corrupted Scripture would be a mixture of truth and error, which people say it is, necessarily subject to human judgment rather than sitting in judgment upon man. Now, most of the articles written about the Bible approach it imperfectly and give you that idea. Well, which version do you want to use? There's so many different versions. And it's like being in some of the other religions, depending upon who you follow, you get radically different points of view. Well, let's look at this. The history of the Old Testament. Rabbi Akiba, 2nd century A.D., with the desire to produce an exact text, is credited with saying that the accurate transmission, the Masoreth, of the text is a fence for the Torah. In Judaism, a succession of scholars was charged with standardizing and preserving the biblical text, fencing out all possible introduction of error. And we have had points when the Masoretes in the 10th century took up where they left off for the previous people who tried to maintain the authenticity and the accuracy of the transmission of the original text of the Old Testament. They had a mess to fix, and they did. They even switched out the language and used that because as the language of the Old Testament, the Old Hebrew, has characters in it that are hard to be read when we have an old manuscript. So, but with the changing of the texts and the vowel signs, squaring off characters, the text can be readily read and not misinterpreted because letters or words can't be read anymore. The Sepharim, from Hebrew meaning scribes, were Jewish scholars and custodians of the text between the 5th and 3rd centuries B.C. The Zugoth, pairs of textual scholars, were assigned to this task in the 2nd and 1st centuries B.C. The Tanaim, repeaters or teachers, were active until A.D. 200. In addition to preserving the Old Testament text, the work of Tanaim can be found in the Midrash, the textual interpretation, Sefer edition, and Talmud instruction, the latter of which is divided into Mishnah, repetitions, and Gemara, the matter to be learned. The Talmud gradually was compiled between A.D. 100 and A.D. 500. It was natural that the Tanaim would preserve the Hebrew Bible, since their work had to do with compiling several centuries of rabbinic teaching based on the biblical text. The Talmudists, A.D. 100 to 500, Geisler and Nix, authors on this subject, explain the second scribal tradition extending from about 400 B.C. to almost A.D. 1000. Following the first period of Old Testament scribal tradition, the period of Sepharim, 400 B.C. to A.D. 200, there appeared a second, the Talmudic period, A.D. 100 C. to 500 and 500, which was followed by the better-known Masoretic tradition, upon which our today's Old Testament is based. Ezra worked with the first of these groups, and they were regarded as the Bible custodians until after the time of Christ. Between A.D. 100 and 500, the Talmud instruction teaching grew up as a body of Hebrew civil and canonical law based on the Torah. The Talmud basically represents the opinions and decisions of Jewish teachers from about 300 B.C. to A.D. 500, and it consists of two main divisions, the Mishnah and the Gemara. During this period, a great deal of time was spent cataloging Hebrew civil and canonical law. The Talmudists had quite an intricate system for transcribing synagogue scrolls. Thus, far from regarding an older copy of the scriptures as more valuable, the Jewish habit has been to prefer the newer as being the most perfect and free from damage, because they had such a organized group of individuals throughout the centuries to determine and correct errors and keep the Old Testament scripture as accurate as they could. Samuel Davidson describes some of the disciplines of the Talmudists in regard to the scriptures. These minute regulations are as follows. The synagogue roll must be written on the skins of clean animals, prepared for the particular use of the synagogue by a Jew. They must be fastened together with strings taken from clean animals. Every skin must contain a certain number of columns equal through the entire codex. The length of each column must not extend over less than 48 or more than 60 lines, and the breadth must consist of 30 letters. How meticulous they were! This is a way to gauge whether or not mistakes have been made. The whole copy must be first line. And if 3 words be written without a line, it is worthless. The ink should be black, neither red, green, nor any other color, and be prepared according to a definite recipe. An authentic copy must be the exemplar, from which the transcriber ought to not in the least deviate. And that's so far been the great record of this Bible. No word or letter, not even a yod, must be written from memory, the scribes not having looked at the codex before him. Between every consonant, the space of a hair or thread must intervene. Between every new parasha or section, the breadth of 9 consonants. Between every book, 3 lines. These are really meticulous things. You devoted your whole life doing this. No wonder the Bible in the Old Testament is so accurate. The 5th book of Moses must terminate exactly with a line, but the rest need not do so. Besides this, the copyist must sit in full Jewish dress, wash his whole body, not begin to write the name of God with a pen newly dipped in ink. And should a king address him while writing that name, he must take no notice of him. So Davidson adds that the rolls in which these regulations are not observed are condemned to be buried in the ground or burned, and they are banished to the schools to be used as reading books. The Talmudists were so convinced that when they finished transcribing a manuscript, MS, they had an exact duplicate that would give the new copy equal authority. Frederick Kenyon in Our Bible and Ancient Manuscripts expands on the above and the description of older copies. The same extreme care which was devoted to the transcription of manuscripts is also at the bottom of the disappearance of the earlier copies. That's why we have so few copies. When a manuscript had been copied with the exactitude prescribed by the Talmud and had been duly verified, it was accepted as authentic and regarded as being of equal value with any other copy. If all were equally correct, age gave no advantage to a manuscript. On the contrary, age was a positive disadvantage, since a manuscript was liable to become defaced or damaged in a lapse of time. A damaged or imperfect copy was at once condemned as unfit for use. Attached to each synagogue was a geniza, or lumber cupboard, in which defective manuscripts were laid aside, and from these receptacles some of the oldest manuscripts now extant have in modern times been recovered. Thus, far from regarding an old copy of the Scripture as more valuable, the Jewish habit had been to prefer the newer as being the most perfect and free from damage. The older copies were consigned to the geniza, naturally perished, either from neglect or from being deliberately burned when the geniza became overcrowded. The absence of very old copies, you notice that they kept this up to date. Nobody let it lapse. The absence of very old copies of the Hebrew Bible need not, therefore, either surprise or disquiet us. If to the causes already enumerated, we add the repeated persecutions involving much destruction of property, to which the Jews have been subject, the disappearance of the ancient manuscripts is adequately accounted for. For those which remain may be accepted as preserving that which alone they profess to preserve, namely the Masoretic text. So we have the opposite in the Greek text of the New Testament. We can look back at the older ones, and a lot of times we find that there's been changes made because of the lack of discipline, especially in the Palestinian manuscript area. The Egyptian area is a little more disciplined, and they try to reserve and preserve the texts of the Greek Testament, New Testament, in more regimented, disciplined fashion like they did the Old Testament. Reverence for the Scriptures and regard for the purity of the sacred text did not first originate after the fall of Jerusalem. So the Masoretes were the Jewish scholars who between AD 500 and AD 950 gave the final form to the text of the Old Testament, which we have in our copies of which we have in our possession today in all the museums around. The destruction of the temple in AD 70, along with the dispersion of the Jews from their land, became a powerful impetus to, number one, standardize the consonantal text, and two, standardize punctuation and the use of vowels to preserve correct vocalization and pronunciation for reading. They were called the Masoretics because they preserved in writing the oral tradition, the Mahorah, concerning the correct vowels and accents and the number of occurrences of rare words of unusual spellings. They received the unpointed, comparable to English without vowels, consonantal text of the Sopharium and inserted the vowel points that gave to each word its exact pronunciation and grammatical form. that preserved the